Greetings, this is iVideo. My name is John Savers. I'm your host. iVideo is a program which looks at history broadly speaking and tries to unearth interesting data to make the viewing public a little bit more aware of the subject matter. It's our feeling that the educational system and the media regularly omit important information, and that therefore the perspective of the general public is somewhat irregular, angular, and so forth, and it's our hope to partially fill in the gaps to give them a more rounded view. Now, we have been looking at World War II, the camps and the general area understood by the word Holocaust. We noted at the outset that over the last 50 years, the whole aspect of the camps has kind of snowballed so that it has kind of a leading position in the whole historical event, that whole arena known as World War II. We think that this is rather singular. We have proposed looking at this matter in a scientific, academic, research sort of way, trying to find facts and to understand this better, and have not approached this as a religious event, which is sort of the exclusive domain of one particular group. Therefore, we have set forth this program. Now, of course, there have been people who are unhappy with the program, the facts and so forth like that. And in fact, they have set forth something of a clamor to try to, I think, obstruct this particular program and its easy accessibility to the general public. We regret this, but it's not altogether unexpected, as we have seen this sort of thing before in other areas in the realm of politics and the general political economy of the United States of America and other Western countries. So undaunted, we continue. Now, we have of late been looking at possible motivation behind this whole business. The singling out of the Germans as fall guys apparently began around the beginning of this of the 20th century, and kind of continued all the way through. And the public, the Western public, has pretty much bought it. We have noted that there have been atrocities alleged which seem to recapitulate atrocities committed by the people who are pointing the fingers in other contexts after World War I and the ravaging of Eastern Europe and Russia. We have produced some evidence to that point, and we will continue to assert this, this theory, this postulation that a good deal of the so-called atrocities committed by Germans are fictional and represent the vivid memory of Marxist Jews recalling the atrocities that they committed themselves in Eastern Europe and Russia, using the material of Bela Kun, Tibor Samueli, etc., etc. We are now going to take a little bit more of a look at the so-called communist camps. Now, it is a fact that the concentration camps run by the communists beginning somewhere around the 20s finally came to number at their heyday 53 major concentration camps, which were sometimes euphemistically called re-education camps, I believe. And I believe as many as 300 or more minor camps, maybe even 400. But it was quite a lot. And there is a particular reason or rationale for this, particularly in regard to the problem of the peasants or independent kulaks that the communists faced, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Sverdlov, etc. Well, let's take a look at this, shall we? But the most difficult problem was the handling of the peasants. Lenin himself had long ago recognized that the greatest obstacle in establishing a communistic slave state would be the strong and healthy peasant. Consequently, the government had but one alternate: the complete destruction of the healthy peasantry. Although the new rulers, ever since their rise to power, encountered a stiff opposition from the peasantry, their real drive to achieve their object commenced with the first 5-year plan. It was to be a bloody and, in the history of mankind, a unique act. The entire independent peasantry, the so-called kulaks, were dispossessed of their possessions and driven from their farms. During this process of raskulachavanje, or diskulakizing, a great number were massacred on the spot. But the masses of these dispossessed farmers became so great that it was absolutely impossible to destroy them all, and the government was forced to adopt other methods of dealing with them. The kulaks were then gathered from all sections, dumped into box cars, and transferred to remote places of the Soviet Union. Endlessly, these trains rolled through the steppes and snow-covered fields of Siberia. Uncountable was the number of men who never were to see their point of destination. They died on the way to the concentration camps, but millions reached their destinations nevertheless. Although these camps had already existed previously, they began to grow in importance, and new ones were created as fast as the living material rolled in. For millions of people, concentration camps have been nothing but transit points into eternity. Here, the death of millions could not be accounted for as murder, and moreover, these death sacrifice victims of Jewish tyranny could be exploited to the last drop of blood in the interest of a socialistic state before being freed by the merciful reaper, death. The purpose of the creation of these slave camps is threefold. One, the inconspicuous extermination of the undesirables, exploitation of the physical power of the condemned, and three, the setting of an example for the entire population to suffocate any possible uprisings against the Jewish despotism. In spite of the ever-increasing masses of prisoners, this living material very often is not sufficient to fulfill the fantastic plans of the government, because people die as a result of the horrible conditions that prevail in these concentration camps about as rapidly as new material can be delivered. And so the Soviet government organizes and conducts from time to time manhunts to provide new material. People are often arrested and exiled who, even in the eyes of the government, could not be in any sense regarded as undesirables. They are arrested, parted from their loved ones, and sent to camp where a certain death awaits them just for the simple reason that these Jewish despots need manpower which is cheaper than even the use of animals. This is a citation from Jewish-run concentration camps in the Soviet Union by Dr. Hermann Greif, appearing in the Defender magazine, 1937, first edition, pages 6, 7, and 8. Now, let me just break in to observe again the comments made by Menachem Begin, the Jewish political figure who eventually headed the State of Israel. who in his book, I think entitled White Knight, had quoted another concentration camp person stating that if he had his choice of residing in Pekora Lager or in Dachau, he would choose Dachau. These camps were so terrible that even the Jews would run to the German camps for safety and better food and health and so forth reasons, security. And oddly enough, these camps were run by Jews, these Soviet communist camps. To this point, consider the following. What has never been revealed in America is that Stalin chose legions of Jews to run his concentration camps called colonies or work camps. Lenin had earlier stated that Jews make better communists than Russians. Likewise, Stalin believed that Jews would make better concentration camp heads and placed the GULAG prisons totally in their hands. Aaron Schultz, a Jewish overseer of the Canal Project, Jacob Rappaport, a Jewish deputy, Matvei Berman, a Jewish deputy chief of all GPU prisons. Of course, Naftali Frenkel was the Jewish chief of all GULAG prisons. Propagandists would bark such slogans through a bullhorn as, "From us everything, to us nothing." Also, not just work, but heroic work. As a warning to slackers, there were threatening slogans such as, "Love your canal, there is no time to be ill. Do not take off. Whoever does not work does not eat." Robert Conquest is the world's foremost authority on the Soviet GULAG prisons. His book, The Great Terror, states that there were about 12 million political prisoners between 1937 and 1938. Some 1 million were legally executed by drumhead courts, while 2 million others died of exhaustion, starvation, cold, and disease. The Jew Naftali Frenkel had successfully built the smaller Belomor Canal in 1930 with a loss of only 30,000 lives. Thus, he was flown to Moscow for a 3-hour meeting with Stalin, who had launched his first 5-year plan in 1929. Frenkel told Stalin that through the use of millions of prisoners for corrective labor, the country could make a great industrial leap into the 20th century. He outlined a plan even more appealing to Stalin. He suggested the building of a canal linking the Baltic Sea with the White Sea and the Adriatic. This was said to be impossible at the time. Frenkel suggested that it be named the Stalin White Sea Canal. Stalin was so pleased that he placed Frenkel in charge of all prison labor under Yagoda's GPU secret police. The megalomaniacal Stalin believed that the canal would make his name live on in history just like the pyramids. However, the great Stalin would build the canal in a record-breaking time of only 20 months, from September 1931 to April 1933. Now, let me break in to say, in regard to this particular canal, when it was finished, it turned out to be only 16 feet deep, and hence was unusable by any of the larger ships that required a deeper draft, and hence took on something of a recreational type of canal almost, rather than the ideal of a canal similar to the Suez or the Panama or something which mighty ships could plow through. But anyway, let's get back to the story, shall we? The Jew Frenkel was put in charge of this vast project covering hundreds of miles. This is a frozen area just east of Finland with the ground covered with heavy boulders. Almost overnight, some 100,000 corrective workers were dumped there without adequate housing, clothing, food, or health facilities. They were to live in dilapidated, lice-infested barracks and tents, which were erected by the thousands. There was no modern equipment such as bulldozers and derricks. It was to be built with pick and shovel. Now, let me break in to say this much, that if they did indeed have that kind of equipment to use, it would have been gained through their Freemasonic contacts in the West, the runners of the great businesses that could give them the tractors and whatnot that they needed practically free. So I'm sure that with a little bit of help, a little bit of luck, a little bit of persistence, perhaps with the help of Armand Hammer, etc., they could have indeed have gotten these pieces of equipment to help them in their slave operation. But let's get back to the story. It is estimated that 250,000 prisoners died while building the canal. Everything was disorganized, with people trying to pry up boulders with their bare hands to falling off planks while pushing wheelbarrows of heavy stones. Came up with the idea of the shock worker. These were people who would work longer hours than required and break records for quotas. Their reward would be higher food rations at the expense of others and time off their sentence. Thus, the heads of the shock worker brigades would closely monitor the other members of their group. Often workers judged to be lazy or slow, and thus posing the threat of reducing the brigade's rations, would be beaten or killed with guards looking the other way. There were 2 12-hour shifts. One would work at night under searchlights. If a group got behind, a storm attack would be declared, and the work brigades would labor a straight 48 hours. With freezing weather and flimsy living quarters that did not keep out the sub-zero cold, people died like flies. At the end of each shift, horse-drawn sledges would collect the corpses to clean the project up. So-called loafers and idlers were declared as class enemies and often executed. The GPU even had a brass band play propaganda songs to urge the workers on to greater efforts. Now, it should be noted that although the Marxists, Jewish-led Marxist revolutionaries, for the most part, Grand Orient Freemasons, it seems, operated with extreme cruelty in consolidating their hold on the governments of East Europe and Russia. And particularly Russia was the gem. And it is these people then to whom Lenin and Stalin naturally turned when it came time for such things as this Stalin White Sea Canal project, a kind of a show project in Stalin's mind, but also, as noted, a means by which to utilize slave labor and to eliminate the independent kulaks, the independent small farmers, and not so small and often enough, to get rid of these people, much as they had gotten rid of most of the intellectuals of the urban areas, and also the sounder elements within the officers' corps, that is the patriots, and within the police services. All these were replaced by sound Marxists, usually Jews, and a spy system to note and root out any disgruntled people for extermination and or slave labor. Now, incidentally, slave labor is not a totally new concept to Jews. As far back as the Roman Empire, Jews were instrumental Jewish traders in running the slave markets, one of the big markets, economic markets of the time. And subsequently, Jews were major players in the white slavery which occurred throughout the Dark Ages and Middle Ages on up into modern times. in which pretty little blonde, blue-eyed German girls, Austrian or French or what have you, were shanghaied to the bordellos of North Africa and the seraglios, the harems and so forth, the bordellos of the Levant and all the way out to the Far East. So there was big money in this. In fact, it may still be going on. And also, Jews were big-time participants in the African slave trade, both as procurers at the source, shippers, plantation owners, and traders of bodies, booze, and cane sugar and so forth, the ingredients, I think, for this whole trade. In fact, when Columbus came over here, Columbus, who is thought by some to also be of Jewish extraction, having the name Cologne, and who was accompanied by a number of Jewish trader adventurers, indeed brought back American Indians, Caribbean Indians, as slaves, a potential a new source of slaves. So the idea of slavery is by no means a new or a convenient, as it were, a one-time ad hoc type of a program utilized by Jews in an emergency situation occurring after the revolution in 1919. But they've had long experience in this sort of thing. Well, that being so, let us now turn to why Lenin and Stalin perhaps felt obliged to rely upon Jews particularly for this nasty work. Now please consider. We are in possession of very reliable and true information about the life of the exiled. The best reports are those supplied by persons who themselves were once condemned but were successful in their desperate effort to escape. Here follows the story of a Russo-German farmer, Rempel, who, as an eyewitness, tells his own experiences. One of them particularly aroused my pity. His face was frozen and black, the cheeks and nose were covered with pus, and I had considerable difficulty in suppressing an abominable feeling. In spite of his wounds, he was working in the cold wind. I asked him why he would not have himself treated in the hospital. He looked up in horror and replied in a timid and frightened voice, "Kanzlagernei," sentenced to compulsion camp. The rough climate and extremely hard work left a pitiful imprint on the prisoners. Tired and bent, they moved about. A certain amount of work, Urok, task, was given every day, but it was necessary to work at least 12 hours to get this Urok done. I was told that in the fall, 3,000 prisoners were stuffed into one of the barracks, and of this number, only 75 survived. The rest of them died. Another Russo-German who also had escaped from a concentration camp gives his experiences as follows. I have never in my life met anybody who treated a dog in such a manner as people of every nationality are being treated at Solovsky. To be beaten wantonly is nothing unusual. Everybody is used to that. We work from early till night and have to dig stumps from the frozen ground, and all that for a very small piece of bread of bad quality. Sometimes we got 2 salt herrings per day, but were refused drinking water. In winter, we often collapsed in the extreme cold. Beatings. We were dragged into the forest when we were unable to lift an arm. In the eyes of those devils, it is unwillingness to work, and the result, singular treatment. In winter, we were confined naked to blockhouses with a temperature of 50 to 55 degrees Reaumur. In summer, we were stripped to the skin, tied to trees, and given as prey to millions of mosquitoes. A citation from Jewish-run concentration camps in the Soviet Union by Dr. Hermann Greif, appearing in the first edition of the Defender magazine, 1937, pages 13 through 15. Now, I'd like to also give you a few more vivid examples of the horrors and deprivations which were inflicted upon ethnic groups in Russia during and after the World War II. So please attend. In July, the NKVD headquarters in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states received the order of evacuation of all prison camps threatened by the German advances. If evacuation was impossible, all prisoners and captives were to be killed. In Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporozhye, all prisoners were massacred. In the Caucasian Kabardino-Balkar region, 3,000 state slaves working in the local factory were executed. In Ukraine, NKVD guards who had heard the German artillery fire stopped a train loaded with prisoners and machine gunned several hundred inmates. Only 14 wounded men survived under the heap of massacred men and women. The German soldiers rescued 6,000 men waiting for mass execution on the road from Minsk to Smolensk. Citation from the Barnes Review, Volume 4, Number 1, page 25.